Welcome back to the Rugby Paper Podcast and welcome to 2024. We hope you've had a great holiday season and are looking forward to a cracking year of rugby with the Six Nations not too far away. First though, the Rugby Paper Podcast reflects on what was a crazy 2023. Joining myself and the columnists to do so is former England prop and the Rugby Paper's very own Jeff Probyn. Before we kick off this episode of the pod, Christmas is coming up, everyone. For any rugby superfan out there, give them the ultimate Christmas present by gifting them an official hospitality experience at Twickenham with Keith Prowse, principal sales partner to England Rugby Hospitality. They've got a place at the stadium called The Gate, and it is incredible. It's a chop house-style restaurant serving some incredible steaks and an all-inclusive bar. But that's not even the best thing, as the premium seats it offers are right on the touchline between the 22s in the East Stand, which in my opinion are the best seats in the stadium. It's an incredible experience, and they now only have packages left for the England-Wales match for next year's Guinness Six Nations. So I suggest you get in touch with our friends at Keith Prowse by visiting their website, keithprowse.co.uk/the Rugby Paper. The Rugby Paper Podcast wishes you a very, very happy new year. We hope you've had a wonderful holiday season and that you're looking forward to 2024 with optimism. The podcast is keeping going until the new year. We're obviously starting our Six Nations build-up later this month. Before we do that, this week, we're going to look back a bit on 2023. A World Cup year for men's rugby. We'll chat about world and domestic rugby and how it changed over the course of 2023. Joining myself and the columnist today to do that is former England prop Jeff Probyn. How are you, Jeff?
Very well, Oliver. Looking forward to this chat and, a new year and hopefully some better rugby than we've seen in the past year.
Okay, well, maybe an indication of what you're going to say about the past year. I'll ask you that in a second. Have you had a good Christmas? What did you guys get up to?
Well, the entire family arrived, so we had 14 of them here for Christmas, which was a little bit hectic to say. I got the grandkids as well, so all that lot running around going mad, trying to put a lot of pressure on. But it's good to see them because half of my family lives in Germany now. My middle son married a German girl. They lived over here for 9 years, and then they went back to Munich.
Wow.
He still plays rugby over there, though. They do have a rugby team in Munich, believe it or not. Not particularly good, but they're there.
Awesome. All right. Well, I hope it was restful, even if it was slightly hectic. Let's open the rugby door straight away then. So you already alluded to it just then. How would you define, the rugby you saw in 2023? And we're thinking, obviously, the magnified rugby.
Well, I'd say the club game was its usual self. Cricket scores week in, week out, so you're not really getting true competitions. When we got into the internationals, I think the debacle with Eddie Jones going, Steve Borthwick taking over, not having enough time to develop his own ideas and his own squad, didn't contribute to England producing a worthwhile performance. I think that there's been a lot of positive talk about England's World Cup, whereas realistically there shouldn't be. England played no tier one teams in their build-up to the quarterfinals, and then the first time they faced what could be called serious opponents, which was South Africa, they lost. And all right, so they then go back and play a team that they've already beaten and beat them again to become third. We're not the third best team in the world. If we'd faced Ireland, if we'd faced France, if we'd faced New Zealand, perhaps we could argue legitimately that, and we've won those games, that we are improving as a nation. We need to see better direction, and hopefully Steve Borthwick would have learned some lessons from that World Cup, and that will send him in the right direction going forward. Obviously Owen Farrell stepping down from England will make a difference. It means that they're going to need a new captain. It means that they're going to have to find a true fly half, another fly half who can take the control that Farrell had or supposedly had, and lead the team forward.
Jeff, one really crucial point that comes out of what you've just been saying is England are going to need to find a new captain. Now, the captain, there's obviously all the press talk, but the press talk is that Borthwick, having spent I don't know, a match in the stands with Ellis Genge next to him, is looking at Ellis Genge as his next captain. What are your thoughts about that? A, about Genge as a test loose head, and B, about the potential, if you accept the thesis that Joe Marler is the best loose head that England have got, and that he's likely to be fit, I think, for the Six Nations. Where does this sit with you as a former international prop?
Well, I'll be honest with you and say that England, we always had a dominant scrum. One of the aspects of when I was playing is we dominated everyone we played against. Our main battles were obviously against the French, who had major qualities and some very good dirty players. But Genge is not a bad prop. He's, let's put it this way, he's better than Sinclair. Let's put it that way. But neither of them have, if you like, the power to threaten the opposition. I think also, if you're a captain and you're in a scrum, you can't see what's going on in the outside. If you're supposed to be a leadership person who actually is controlling the game and controlling the way that the game is being played, then you can't really be a prop forward, because you're in the middle of a scrum. You're only concentrating on that one effort. To be honest, I don't think captains are that important. Certainly when we were playing back in the day, yes, it's a historic thing that we have a captain, and it's a bit like being in the armed services. A captain is chosen. He's not necessarily the best man to lead the team, but he's a chosen man by the coach. That means he has a better relationship with the coach, probably, than other members in the team, but not necessarily with the team and the players. Each player who's playing in the team should be the best player in his position. And in that way, you then build a team. If each player is the best player in his position, he will bring whatever he needs to bring to the team. If you've got a captain who's a fly half like Farrell was, or centre like Farrell was, how can he tell the props what to do? He can't, because he doesn't know anything about front row play. And vice versa. If you're a prop forward, how do you tell the backs how to attack, where to attack, what areas of the game we're going to play? Are we going to play a kicking game? Are we going to play a running game? Whatever. How can that be? The guy who's supposed to do that is the coach. And he's the guy that defines the way the game's played. The captain is just a man who relays the coach's message.
Jeff, it's a really good point you make about the coach and the captain, because I think Genge's best rugby by a million miles was when he was at Leicester, when Borthwick was there, and when Borthwick made him the captain. And this is about 3 years ago now, wasn't it? And I remember then writing a piece saying that Genge is probably the England captain going forward. And if you pick, 3 years ago, I believe that was the situation. But now, him and Sinclair have both, well, trod water would be the polite way of putting it at Bristol as props, in my opinion. And he goes down the pecking order as captain, in my opinion. But it seems that Borthwick does still rate him and is going to try and sort of regenerate him for England like he did for Leicester.
Do you believe
you're not going to want your captain leaving the field? Yeah. 60
That's
minutes.
Another one, but it happens, doesn't it?
And if the way that the game's played now, front row forwards don't play for 80 minutes.
No. Do you believe that Joe Marler is England's best loose head?
I think he is at the moment. Certainly, what he's producing at club level, and also what him and Cole produced in that quarter-final, where they actually kept the England scrum stable and level with the South Africans. And when the substitutes were made, the first thing the South Africans did is drive the England scrum backwards 20 metres. To virtually say well, I'm exaggerating there, it was only about 5 or 6 meters, but it was straight in front of the referee, and it immediately put in the referee's mind then that South Africa were the dominant scrum. And that's what led to the penalty that led to the winning kick. So, once you've got that idea, you've got to keep your scrum and keep the stability. Why they changed Cole and Marler, who knows? I certainly wouldn't.
I'm intrigued by what you say as well about the role of the coach now and the role of the captain. I've always sort of thought that, I agree with the premise that you pick your best players first and then you find your captain outside that. Sometimes there'll be blokes who are inspirational because of the way they play or because of their personality. That happens sometimes, doesn't happen all the time. But the idea that the coach now has supplanted the people on the field in terms of how they respond during the course of a game really bothers me. I actually think that they have far too much influence. What they say at halftime in the week or 2 weeks or however bloody long they get now before the team goes out, they've got their chance to have their say. On the pitch, it should be a player's game, and it should be players who are making the key decisions on the pitch.
Nick, I love that. I think what you're saying is perfect, but you've got to remember one thing now. The coaches are paid. And so they take responsibility. And the last thing they're going to do is allow freedom for players. I mean, players say like Danny Cipriani, there's an example. A player who has got talent, certainly, and shows sometimes that he can play a consistent game. Other times he goes off and does things crazy and wild. If you're a coach, why don't you pick him? You don't pick him because he's not going to obey what you tell him to do. He's going to do something wild. If it works, great, lovely, well done, Danny. If it doesn't work, he's threatening your job.
Yeah,
and that's you know. And when you're looking at what coaches are earning nowadays, particularly the England coach, best part of £500,000, are they going to walk away from it?
And the rest.
And
another
the rest,
$250,000 on top of that, at least.
And the Wales coach at 600k.
Listen, I'll tell you what.
You know, that's the difference. It makes a difference.
Is it not true, chaps, that the captain in the professional era, the captain's principal role is not on the field? Maybe it was the same back in your day. I mean, everyone in that England squad swears by Farrell. Now, whether they do it for public consumption or whether they really believe it, but I can see that he's a very, very good shop steward, for want of a better description, for the players in camp. He's quite a forceful, he's a very forceful personality. That doesn't come over in the public-facing role. He seems rather truculent and reluctant to speak and all those things that we're aware of. But behind the scenes, a bit like Martin Johnson, was precisely the same in the public-facing role when he was playing. Didn't want to engage. Would rather have been anywhere else than sitting in a press conference. But I expect he was bloody good behind the scenes. I mean, I don't know how you found Carling, who was a very high-profile captain.
Higher profile than Farrell.
Did Will stand there on the field at Twickenham and tell Rob Andrew what to do, Jeff? Probably not.
No, but I think, as you know, when Will was there, he never really spoke to the forwards because he didn't really understand the forward game. And to a certain extent, we were, should we say, a group of our own in that sense. We played our own game. Even the coaches, like Roger Rutley, when it came to the scrummaging session, he'd step back and leave the players to organise it and do what they wanted to do. Simply because if you are considered the best in your position, you already know how to play the game.
Yeah, sure.
It's just how you combine with the other players around you.
So isn't it an off-field role, principally?
Not really. No, I mean, the captain is that off-field role. As I say, he's the link between the coach and the players. And so he brings the message, if you like, when you're on the field. He's the one who changes from plan A to plan B. He's the one who says, right, the referee, the coach said that in this position, we'll do this, we'll do that. But if that doesn't work, it still relies on players using their own initiative to take a game forward. A lot what happens now is players are not allowed to use their own initiative. They have to play by the rules.
Well,
otherwise,
that's certainly true. That's certainly true. I mean, there are certain coaches who have been very, very forthright in saying it's my way or the highway. Yeah. Don't you dare go off script.
Pay him less, and take them out of the script to a degree, because they're becoming a menace in some ways. Some of them. I mean, you look at the Eddie Jones show that we endured. 7 years of 2 years of sort of great achievement, and then the rest of it really a downhill slide. and the coach becoming the dominant figure in every single element of England rugby, of the international side, and dominating the whole landscape, and not in the end to a positive effect at all. In fact, it switched a lot of people off.
No, agreed. And
so,
you know,
I mean, I think that we've got to be careful. I mean, coaches have a hell of a lot to say, and they. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be significant figures in the game. They should be. A lot of them have earned the right to be. But for them to have the sort of influence that they have, and it's always been an element of my way or the highway with some coaches, but I just think that their role in the game at the moment is overblown. And I think that they're paid, for a part-time role. Remember, Eddie Jones's job was 6 months of a year. That was it.
Well, in theory, it wasn't. It was the entire year, because in theory, he'd be looking at players, making judgments, seeing how the players are playing, what they are, where they're going to fit into his thing. I mean, if you look at...
he was in Japan half the time, Jeff.
Pardon? I don't agree, but I'm saying in theory. I did say in theory, remember.
Yeah.
But, if you look at Eddie Jones' time with England, the first few months, the first portion of his time there was on the back of the development that Stuart Lancaster had done. Stuart Lancaster had taken the team and chosen the players and moved them in there. He had all the problems with the centres, and that's why he said we won't win this World Cup, but the squad will get stronger over the next three years, the next period. And that's exactly what happened. They did get stronger over that next period. But Eddie Jones had a different idea.
Isn't the key element in this the role of what you would call the senior player group in conjunction with the coach? If you look at Lions now, I know the Lions is you're not comparing apples with pears, because the Lions is a quick fix thing by definition. They're trying to cover an awful lot of ground very quickly to make themselves competitive against a very, very good, or theoretically a very, very good opposition. But the first thing McGeechan used to do, and I dare say at a Lions coaches, Gatland certainly, that almost the first thing they did was identify a senior player group. Now, not all of them might get in the test side. Rob Wainwright, for example, in '97, was in the senior player group immediately as captain of Scotland, and he only played in the last test because he didn't get picked. But that group on that particular tour were very, very influential and were as thick as thieves with the coaching team. And I'm not sure that I know who England's senior player group is at the moment. I wouldn't like to say. You imagine Tom Curry is one. You imagine Ford is one, and Farrell. But
and a sort of adjunct to this is this concept that you pick a captain because he can talk to the referee without upsetting him. I mean, it's just bollocks.
Well, yes, and
I also had this concept of co-captain is also bollocks. You have a captain, and like Chris said, I think a senior player group is quite important. But you don't have co-captains and vice-captains. You have a captain, and get on with it. I mean, if you're a referee, you've got 3 people on the pitch, 1 captain and 2 co-captains and vice-captains. I mean, it must be mental. I mean, just get on with it and pick a captain.
You've got to remember that in theory, only the captain can talk to the referee.
Yeah, and pretty sparingly, as I remember.
And pretty sparingly, as you say, but only the captain. But you look at the game now, and everybody's talking to the referee. Some of them are swearing at him or whatever. You can see that. You can see what they're talking. You can see. You don't have to be a lip reader to understand what's going on. Now, the fact is that the referees have lost elements of their authority. And what the coaches are doing by picking captains who are seen as iconic is putting pressure on the referees. It's a way of putting pressure on referees that to help to, if you like, move decisions in your direction.
Didn't really work with Owen Farrell, did it?
Well, Owen was how can you say? He was more inclined to abuse the referee than actually discuss talk about something to the referee. He's more inclined to use an instant reaction, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean,
it was just the expression on his face and the tone of his voice. He could actually have been offering the referee £1 million loan tax interest free, but the way he did it was almost guaranteed to put people's backs up. Borthwick was terrible at it.
I don't think Borthwick was terrible at it. I don't think Johnny Sexton's not great at it either.
But there's an interesting thing, you know. Owen Farrell, as we're all saying or agreeing, didn't talk to referees well, and yet he's perceived as a very good captain because of his relationship with his players. And yet there are some players who refuse to speak to him ever again because of the way he spoke to them and the way he talked to them and the way he reacted with them. And some players have been dropped from the squad as a result. So, you know, Owen's had an impact on players, some of it positive, some of it negative. You know, do we believe that he's been this wonderful guy in the changing room that everybody loves and wants to kiss and cuddle and keep him close to them? When you hear some of the stuff outside, but that'd be the same for any team, any club,
and any captain, wherever, and any captain. Anyone who's not thriving under a particular captain is going to bear a bit of a grudge. I mean, it may not be excessively deep, but there's going to be some frustration and dissatisfaction there, isn't there? If you're not getting picked, you don't have to be Danny Cipriani to fall out with your captain. That can happen to anyone who's not being picked.
I mean, Sam Warburton was a hell of a player, and he's a hell of a good analyst as well.
Yeah,
but you know, when Warren Gatland came out before the 2017 Lions tour, or in the Six Nations with Wales beforehand, and said, you know, made it clear that even though he was a hell of a player, one of the main reasons that he was his captain was because of his handling of referees, because he was brilliant at handling referees. And I'm thinking, crikey, you know, I mean, he shouldn't be able to talk to referees enough to, you know, be brilliant at handling them, if you know what I mean.
And that ship sailed,
did in the last test.
As Jeff says,
we're told all sorts of ships have sailed, Chewy, but it shouldn't have sailed.
No, I don't disagree, but it has.
But you know, you have to.
Well, we need to sink it.
If you think back, you know, it's terrible to do this. Be the man standing there with a pint of beer, resting on his belly, saying it's not like it was in my day. But in terms of how you dealt with referees, you know, as a front row, you couldn't say a word to a referee. If he penalised you for a scrum going down or whatever, you'd get up and you'd look at him and you'd just shake your head and walk away. That was the most you could do. It's changed. It's changed in the way that players are doing it. The fact that referees are going to coaching sessions now as well and being employed by coaches to teach players is also, if you like, damaging.
But referees are also coaching on the field, Jeff. I mean, Johnny Sexton actually asked in the game against in the game where they were knocked out, it was against New Zealand. No, it was against South Africa in the pool game. Whoever refereed that game, Johnny Sexton was heard asking him to stop coaching the Springboks at the breakdown.
Yeah.
And when you were playing, you didn't have that level of chit chat from the referee.
We saw
nowhere near, did you? So now a conversation has developed with referees with verbal diarrhea who can't shut up. It's only the French. Chris, it's only the French guys you don't hear because they can't speak English.
But what's happened, Chris, is that they've literally, the referees are taking over a part of a coaching role, and you can understand why. It's simplicity. If you're told that, if the referee's told that he's in charge of the scrum, so he's standing there, he's actually coaching the way that these two scrums come together.
And he's given a 15.
You're up too high, you're down too low. Put your leg back, put your leg forward. He's doing all that, isn't he?
And they're also under pressure to get a game going, aren't they? Under massive pressure.
Yeah, so despite a 15-stage engagement.
Well, it's not. But it's not just a.
You know, they didn't make that decision. That's the bloody lawmakers.
Well,
yeah. But the lawmakers, you know, well, look, there are still laws. The laws are for the scrum, for instance, the ball, despite the fact it's now allowed to be put over on your side, has to go in straight. The ball never goes in straight in the scrum now. It's put in the second row.
Yeah.
Every time the referee should be penalising that, and yet he's letting it go.
It's
The
also,
line-up.
it's also a
But
law
they're
that
not
the ball
supposed
should
to
not be
debate
passed forward.
stuff. You know,
It's
they're not supposed to
also-
be debating stuff before lineups, but they all go off into little groups, have a conversation, and then walk slowly to the lineup. I mean, the delays in the game that are created now are
The thing
ridiculous.
that's intriguing is that referees still have a hell of an armory when it comes to establishing some control on the field. And we talk about it. We've talked about it many times, I think, on the podcast. But the idea that only occasionally do you see a referee march somebody back 10 meters or a team collectively, for back chat, for continually trying to, subvert the process of the referee getting on with his job, with trying to swing decisions and so on and so forth. I mean, they have the armory there. And, they can yellow card people if need be, if it gets bad enough. So, I just don't understand. It's a permissive sort of approach that says we want to engage with the players, but you engage with the players too far and you get bloody mayhem.
Exactly. Yeah. How true that is. That's one of the things when we were playing, you couldn't engage with the players. And even when you got sent off, you'd go off to the East India Club or wherever it was, where the disciplinary panel were. You walked upstairs, and the first thing they'd say to you, there'd be 6 men sitting on the table in front of you. And the first thing they'd say is, do you believe that the referee is the sole arbiter of the game? To which you had to say, yes. The next words were, right, you're guilty, what's your mitigation? The referee had total authority. Now he doesn't. Now players question him, they challenge him, they say, check with the TMO. Ask the TMO if they, to delay things. New Zealand in the final, you can hear Wayne Barnes shout, no knock on. Then 2 minutes later, he disallows a try for the knock on that he said was no knock on. For the New Zealanders. How can you can't blame players in a way for the lack of decisions that referees are making and relying on TMOs.
Yeah.
Players should still not abuse referees, should still not be talking to referees. The captain should still be the only player who actually talks to the referee. But you have to let the referee make the decisions and not rely on the TMO.
Did English players have to go to the East India Club for disciplinary hearings, Jeff, or was it just the Colonials?
No, I think we all did. I think the RFU used to have the top floor there, didn't they? So, you all got there, whether it's club rugby or it's mainly club rugby.
The subversive Hewett structure.
I think I was playing for Ilford Wanderers the first time I attended a disciplinary hearing. Playing against Bridgewater, their prop punched me, so I punched him back. Yeah. And they never ever see the first one; they only ever see the second one. The referees.
The message from this conversation was rugby was better during the days of empire.
Possibly. But I wasn't around then, so I don't know.
No, none of us were here. We're talking about over a century ago, longer.
You were a
you look as if you were
post-imperial
around then,
tight
but you weren't.
Before Chris gets too non-politically correct, Jeff, I just want to ask about your column that you wrote recently. Obviously, an RFU hybrid deal of sorts is on the horizon. The general discourse around it is that, well, people don't really understand how it's shaping up to work, but you're not overly satisfied with how your understanding of how it would look. So just talk about that a little bit. We spoke about Henry Arundel and the implications of him moving to France and called again for hybrid contracts last week. Talk about your gripes with it.
Yeah, the hybrid contract, why would you need it? In theory, the RFU have had the professional game agreement for ages, which pays the Premiership for the release of players to the coaches. So the coaches would have extra time outside the international window provided by World Rugby so that England would have a better chance of winning those games, those international games. That was the whole idea of it. That was the reason that the RFU were paying hundreds of millions of pounds a year to the Premiership, so that an England coach would have access to players. Now, how is his access going to be any different with this hybrid contract? And I mean, if you look at the hybrid contracts as they're being said, that what they're saying is that it gives the England coach more control. He'll be able to control the fitness, etc. They were doing that back in the amateur days. As I said, we all got an independent fitness thing that we had to go and do. I've still got mine upstairs. I could show you the papers if you want. And it was from Rex Hazeldine, who is actually the guy who's taught most of the fitness people how the fitness structures have gone at clubs. A hybrid contract as well. They're saying it's 150 grand. Well, if you've got 10 games roughly in a year, under the current system, a player would be getting around about 200,000. So they'd be earning more money by just having the match payments rather than he would by having a hybrid contract. It's also not guaranteed that the clubs would reduce their wages to players. Players on a hybrid contract may be seen as special players and therefore get more money. That there's no definition of how this is going to help club finances and how it's going to help the RFU, how it's going to help junior club rugby. It's still only very limited to the Premiership, which is now limited to 10 teams. They're saying about the Championship, but they're not saying about any more money that they could get the Championship and how their squads are going to be affected by this moving players out of the Premiership. We're all assuming that players in the Premiership will be so good that the Championship will hire them. But how are they going to pay them?
And Jeff, also there's the principle of it. If you look at any club squad now, the principle's pretty well established that you're going to have 25 to 30% of your players injured at any given time. So if you're handing out, hybrid contracts, 30% of those players are going to be unavailable to you. What are you going to do with the guys that you've got to call in? How's that going to settle?
But that's the other point as well. They're saying that they're going to have a squad of about 50, and they're only going to give hybrids to about 25. So there's still 25 players who brackets are in the England squad who are not on hybrid contracts.
Absolutely.
So what's going to happen? Are those other people who are in the England squad who are not on the hybrid contracts, are they still going to get a match payment?
I don't know how it works in cricket. I mean, cricket's got a similar system, isn't it? There are a number of central contracts, quite small, 13, 14, whatever it is. But there's a hell of a lot more players involved in the various forms of international cricket that England play who are not on those contracts and are therefore at a sort of lower level of, not of esteem exactly, but I know what you mean. They're not considered quite as special as some people who do have.
And it's causing problems, Chris, isn't it?
It is causing problems. I mean, cricket's got its own complications, obviously. I think Jeff makes a number of good points. I assume that a hybrid contract would give Borthwick some kind of say in how often and when a player plays for his club side.
Yeah. What's really bothering about?
So that's where the more influence. That's where I think
what's bothering?
Chris,
what's bothering about the whole thing is that what bothers me about the whole thing is that the RFU are sort of floating these ideas into the ether without having considered all the permutations that we're now talking about. Or if they have considered them, they haven't bloody spoken about them. No. So, it's just bloody not joined up. It's not joined up in any way, shape or form.
No, they will congregate, didn't they, to say all the things that you would expect someone in his position to say, that we want to be, we should be the best in the world in blah, 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 blah. And this is going to help us on that road and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so he said a load of things, but the devil's always...
Where's the detail? Give us no detail. A, B, C, D, E, F of what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it.
But Nick, it's as I said, They've been doing that already. We've had the professional game agreement that gave the money. It left the England coach, whoever he was, going back. It left them in charge of the players. They had access to their players. They did the training. They did all. It's just by changing it to a partnership. Changing a name to a partnership doesn't change the fact that the RFU are going to spend an awful lot of money, which basically isn't helping the game.
No, agreed.
It's not going to help the game. I mean, we've got a situation now that we know the Championship are not happy with what they're being told. They're being forced down the road with threats that they'll pull up teams from the First Division instead of the Championship to come in there if they won't agree to it. I mean, the RFU should not be threatening clubs.
No way.
It should be explaining to clubs the benefits of this. Absolutely. And how these benefits will work. I mean, the reality is that rugby, certainly junior club rugby, has suffered tremendously by what what Ian Ritchie did when he doubled the contract. You know, I mean, all right. 3 months later, he worked for the Premiership, but
that's coincidence. Pure coincidence, Jeff, and
a pure coincidence. I know.
I mean, on the Championship clubs. I mean, to play devil's advocate just for a second, I don't think they've helped themselves, and I certainly don't think they've helped the English game. But if you want a meaningful second division with promotion and relegation, which I think most people as sports lovers looking on from the outside would respond very positively to. You want that jeopardy at the bottom of, you want action at both ends of the Premiership, all that stuff. But I keep on going back to Bedford as the classic example. They're a pain in the ass. And I've been for years because they had no intention, apart from the 1 year they came up and went straight back down. They had no intention of going back up into the Premiership. They didn't want to. They went on record as saying they had no intention of wanting to. Old Jeff Irving always used to say, we're perfectly happy being the 13th best or the 14th best side in England.
Yeah, well, Chris,
that doesn't help you develop a meaningful championship.
Why? Chris, why? You know why? The reason is because of the pressure that's being put onto the Premiership clubs. The fact that the Premiership itself has ring-fenced itself, but it ring-fenced itself prior to the ring fence by its ground size,
with its minimum criteria. Yeah,
minimum criteria.
I think that goes. And what's happened? I think what's happened in the Premier League. If the Premier League can accommodate Luton, where opposing supporters have to walk through someone's house to get into the ground, and it's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. So they've bitten that bullet. In football, promotion and relegation really is sacrosanct.
Yeah,
and it's wonderful for it. So I do think that the minimum criteria idea that would be the first thing to go. If there was a meaningful championship populated by clubs who genuinely wanted to go up into the Premiership, and I know this throws up a lot of complications over financing and all those kinds of things. But if you want a meaningful second division, it's got to be properly meaningful from both sides.
Chris, I agree with that. And, I played for Bedford.
I'd forgotten that.
Years, back in the day when it was professional.
So did half the Saracens team.
I won't have a harsh word said again.
Indeed.
But Bedford never wanted to get promotion. They never wanted to get promoted because they knew that they couldn't afford it. Yeah. They knew they couldn't afford to pay their players the money that professional players needed, their ground capacity. They couldn't afford to build the capacity up to the levels they got. And look at the teams in the Premiership that have great stadiums but never fill them.
Oh well, no, absolutely.
I buy all of those. It's a growing process. When we compare it with football. Football took over 100 years from its professionalism to get to the stage where it is now, where it's we've tried to do it overnight. You can't do it overnight.
You can make the same argument in French rugby, Jeff. But Pro D2, you do not play in that second division unless you have the capacity attached to the desire and the intention to play top 14.
You're talking about French rugby, but French rugby is very, very different.
That's over 100 years.
I know, because I've got a house in France, right? But we've got a little village. They're level 7. They play level 7 in France. They win a cup and they send out banners, champions of France. The whole village goes and watches their matches every week. The village pays for the pitch maintenance and everything like that. And that's what happens in France. The mairie pays for the stadium. It's not necessarily the rugby club that's paying for the stadium. They're just paying the wages of their players.
Yeah.
Right. The stadium will be paid for by the town. So it's a very
different beast. But I'm just talking about the basic principle of almost alone in world rugby. I suppose you could argue that Japan now has the beginnings of a thriving multi-division promotion and relegation driven domestic tournament. But that's financed in completely different ways, by big companies and all that kind of thing. That's fine. But France over 100 years or so certainly has got a second division that operates in the way that you would want it to operate. And I'm just making the point that if you're trying to replicate or even half replicate that in England, you cannot fill the second division with clubs who don't want to go up. You can't.
I agree. The only way you could do it would be if the RFU or local councillors fund the stadium.
There's got to be for
a rugby club to try and fund the stadium, given the minimum amount of support that they get, is virtually impossible.
Listen, the RFU's been in business for a very long time, Jeff, and it's been sitting on its hands where this is concerned. They should have been talking to local councils and authorities for the last bloody 30 years or so about this. And as far as I'm aware, they still do very little or nothing about on this sort of front. As far as Bedford are concerned, they are the one club who said that they didn't see promotion as the be all end all, didn't want it, etc. But if Bedford had seen anything other than a restrictive cartel practices from the Premiership, they would probably have wanted promotion. And I actually think that they do want promotion now.
Yeah, so, I think we ought to get Bedford in to defend themselves a bit here. We've given them a bit of a shoe-in. And I've made the points that Chris made in a column a while back. But all I would say about Bedford is that they are, in their own way, a brilliantly run club.
Oh, yeah.
They have capacity crowds every Saturday. They've got supporters clubs, dining clubs, sponsors. They don't renege on payments. And they will be sitting there and looking, look, we haven't done a London Irish. We haven't done a Worcester. We haven't done a Wasp. No. We haven't done a Jersey. We're here. We're here. And we might realign now if the game can just organise itself so that we don't go bankrupt if we get promotion and come down.
Yeah, they don't tell us we've got to build a 10,000-seater stadium within.
We need a system whereby we can that jeopardy. You got the jeopardy of promotion relegation. You haven't got the jeopardy of going bust or not. And I think Bedford would join the party instantly if that was the situation.
Those criteria have to be revisited. Obviously, I'm just making the general, just the basic point that if people are serious
about
a second tier with promotion and relegation, it must be populated by people who have a business plan. I'm not saying they've got to do it all themselves, but can show and demonstrate a realistic intention to come up and
look at the business plan. Look at the business plan that Dickie Evans had down in Cornwall and the stadium for Cornwall. No support from the RFU getting behind it at all.
Not a lot of support from the local council either.
Gentlemen. One thing you're all forgetting is I agree that Bedford would go up and willingly go up if there wasn't all the pressures that there are on them. But the reality is that rugby support is declining. The only team that has ever really had major support over many years is Leicester. They're the only ones who got crowds, even in the amateur days, of 20-odd thousand people coming to watch them. Occasionally, yes, there were the special games that happened at Twickenham where there'd be 35,000-40,000 people go and watch a club game. But generally speaking, even with Wasps, I played at Sudbury, a crowd of 3,000-4,000. That was the limit. And the idea that suddenly there's going to be these mass crowds forming in various parts of the country to go and watch rugby is completely naive and completely off the wall. And so what club would invest the money that it takes to build a stadium to house people that are never going to come to the game?
Yeah. So this last weekend and these record crowds that they've had in the Premiership, which have basically they've been sold in over the course of a year or whatever else. What do you think of that in terms of showing that there is a wider audience for for the club game?
Well, you've got to catch 22, haven't you? If you're getting a bigger TV audience, right? Many people won't go and watch the game. So you've got to cross. They take money off the TV. If it's being shown on a number of TV channels, then arguably less people will go to the ground, spend the money, and stand outside and watch it on a freezing cold winter to watch a rugby game. So you've got to catch 22. Mm-hmm. Yes, they say record crowds, but record crowds, Saracens many years ago got Mark Evans to do an assessment of the average crowd that they needed. And the average crowd they needed many, many years ago was just over 15,000 for each game they played. They now have their stadium, I forget what it's called now, but it's only 10,500 or 11,000. So they knew years ago that they needed 15,000 spectators weekly to be able to break even back then.
Yeah.
They weren't paying the levels of salary that they're paying to their players then that they are now.
No.
Now, if they needed that many spectators then, how many do they need now? And the fact that their stadium isn't big enough to house that number of fans is a crucial point. Yeah. That club knows that if they build a stadium that's big enough to house that, or they buy a stadium, that could bring them to the edge of financial ruin.
They don't fill the stadium very often. Sometimes they don't fill the stadium. Even the 10,000 seats they don't fill.
No.
With all their stars, Owen Farrell, etc.
Yeah.
It's a strange dynamic.
But people watch it on telly. We don't know how many fans Saracens have got on the television side of it. Nobody ever goes round and asks people what clubs do you support when you're watching telly. So we don't know that. They could have 1 million fans.
It's a very difficult circle to square. I agree with all of that. And to go back to football again, I know it's a parallel universe and it's a poor comparison in many ways, but they are still absolutely iron about not having live football at 3:00 on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
It's the Premier League matches are never screened at that optimum, what is still the optimum kickoff time for most clubs. They won't do it. They will not do it. I know they shift fixtures around to 12:30 and 5:30 on a Sunday or whatever it is, but the bulk of games are played on a Saturday afternoon, and they will not allow those to be screened live.
Yeah, but arguably, if you don't want to screen them live, so because then if you screen them live, you are going to interfere with the potential audience.
You'll see a drop off in the gate. You will. Yeah. Of course you will.
Yeah. So you can understand that.
Just going back to the England thing. One of the things that I find very difficult to square is that the more time England coaches tend to get with their players, the worse the England team tends to perform.
That could be true. That could be true. Arguably, certainly Steve Borthwick, he hasn't really been given enough time to get his feet under the table before he's had to face major competition like the World Cup. So we still don't know with Steve. I mean, at the end of the day, he only had 1 year as head coach at Leicester, which Leicester won the Championship, the Premiership. But arguably, we still don't know where he's going. He brought in most of Leicester's coaches with him, hasn't he? So we can expect England to play like Leicester. And
I think that's true. We've yet to see Borthwick's England really show its face. I mean, you would hope, wouldn't you, that at the beginning of a World Cup cycle, he whatever radical things he feels, and maybe Steve doesn't feel as though he has to do anything radical at all. He might not be a radical man in any way, shape, or form. It's quite possibly the case. But you would hope that he starts relatively soon, as to say, immediately, in we had a long discussion the other week about shifting players around, maybe Freddie Stewart playing in midfield, and what are we going to do about the foreign based players, etc., etc., etc. You would hope that there'll be some signs of what Borthwick sees as his England side taking shape, not the final version, not the finished product, but just beginning to take shape. From this Six Nations onwards, I think his squad announcement will be very interesting.
Steve Borthwick's had a very, very long time in the saddle in international rugby. He's been assistant coach to Eddie Jones with Japan. He spent 4 years with England, admittedly all as assistant coach, also with the 2017 Lions. So we're not talking about a bloke who's an international novice here. No. He's a novice in terms of being a head coach. And that means he now has sole responsibility for selection. And on the basis of what we've seen over the last year, that may be the area that is an Achilles heel. And we're going to find out this year, because this is the year that he needs to start making change.
He wouldn't be the first. He wouldn't be the first to slide down the selection slope. That's for sure.
No.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key, isn't it? Ultimately, he's really at the start of the next World Cup.
Yeah.
Now, and he's got to look at his players and say, right, who's going to actually be around and still playing at the best in 4 years' time?
Yeah.
Which of these players can I use to develop new players coming into the squad to help me develop the England side? And then you've got to think to yourself, in the back of his head, he's also thinking, what can I get away with the RFU? How many games can I lose before suddenly they start thinking of replacing me?
This is the exact time when he shouldn't have to deliver, not on the results front. This is the start of a World Cup cycle, and England patently need a rebuild. There are people who have already quit, like Courtney Lawes. There are people who I wish would go away from the international scene. I won't. I mean, he will remain nameless, Manu Tuolangi. But I do think that the RFU, if they're going to cut him any slack at all, which I think they should, having gone through the trauma of last year, I think this is the time when they cut him some slack. And if the Six Nations, if he makes changes during the Six Nations and they don't come off for him, and then he goes through the summer and it's a bit rough, then maybe there's a little bit more heat around him in the autumn. But he's got to have a run at games where he doesn't have to deliver. I mean, it's tournament rugby, but it's not the big tournament rugby.
I mean, look, he got given a hospital pass by Eddie Jones.
Yeah.
So he's had a year in the job. Now, I would have said that sort of opportunity was the opportunity that he had. There were no expectations of England going into the World Cup. Really very, very low. There were no expectations of England when he took over in his first Six Nations. The World Cup warm-ups were a bloody disaster. Jeff said where England actually do sit in the world hierarchy is a lot lower than third place, that's for sure. And, I sort of think that in some ways he's had that opportunity. So now what he has to do is to start to deliver in terms of selection and in terms of showing. I agree with you. I don't think everybody should be absolutely, pistol to their head when it comes to results if you're building a new team. But in terms of intent, in terms of how close they drive the best and so on and so forth, that's absolutely crucial.
If England had lost to Argentina in that first World Cup pool game, and either not got out of their group or been blasted out in the quarterfinals with a really bad performance, having finished second in their group, that pistol would be against his head now.
Of course it would. Yeah. I mean, it's standard practice, isn't it? They'd review it because the RFU wants results, and they're not overly keen on looking 4 years forward. I mean, the problem we've got, again, it comes back to an old thing that everyone keeps writing about every week in the rugby paper, the fact that there's no pathway now. You know, we've got the academies, which are all signed up, or a lot of them are signed up to public schools and this, that, and the other. There's no county rugby, so to speak of, to allow late developers the opportunity to come through the system as it used to be back when I was playing, and divisional rugby as well, the same sort of thing, which are things that both Ireland and New Zealand do. You could argue that France is the only country in the world that doesn't have a pathway system as such. So,
but its club game provides the equivalent of, because it's joined up.
Exactly. Whereas our club game doesn't. Our club game, you know, we've got so many foreign players. You know, you've got a couple of foreign players playing in your squad. They can make a player look a lot better than he is. If you've got, say, one of them, an international fly-off from one of the Fiji or whatever, and outside in the inside centre would look a lot better player because the international player is playing inside him. So you can't judge those players. You take that player out of his club and put him into a pathway, which is a county or a divisional side, where he's with completely different people. You can see how good that person is. England no longer have that. They've got rid of it. They've closed the door on it. Where as soon as the RFU agreed to the fact there would be no level of rugby between the Premiership and the England side, they destroyed the whole pathway system that had been in place for over 100 years.
I mean, I would say, one of the things that I least like about the Premiership cartel is their insistence that anybody who plays for England must play in the Premiership. For me, if there is an outstanding talent in the Championship and the England team coach wants to coach him or bring him in to an England training squad, he should have absolute right to do so.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, 100%. Not only the Championship, but anywhere below.
Yeah.
You know, anywhere that there is a player who shows that they've got the ability. Yes, okay, he's not playing at a high standard week in, week out that the Premiership says it plays at or wants to play at. But, you know, he might have the chance if you can move him up through the system. The hybrid contract thing might be a good thing if you actually were looking outside the Premiership for players as well. But just by keeping it within the in the Premiership, an England coach has, you know, we've supposedly got more players than everyone else in the world, but an England coach has less than 200 people players he can choose from.
If you want to think outside the box on talent, why don't you get that 16-year-old darts player and make a hooker of him? At least he'd be able to hit his
He looks like George Shooter.
Exactly. You know, there's things. There's talent everywhere. It's just a case of finding it.
Yeah.
And the way you find it is by giving it opportunity. And we don't give opportunity in rugby. We don't give opportunity to anyone who has missed out on an academy system, who at the age of under 15s, under 16s wasn't signed up. You know, it just doesn't happen now.
You know,
because nobody's playing.
I've got no issue with overseas players playing in English rugby, but the numbers that there are now, and particularly in the Premiership and Premiership squads, has got to be detrimental to England. At the moment, last weekend, there were 9 non-eligible inside centres playing for Premiership clubs. 9. Where's the England coach going to for his inside centres? There are 30 non-English qualified props in the Premiership. You know, I mean, it's a joke. You know, and it's English rugby that's footing the bill.
Yeah, because
the RFU that's footing the bill. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
And this assumption that the Premiership rugby automatically, like you were saying earlier, Joe Cocker-Singer, he's only now 5 years after moving to Bath, back to where he was with London Irish when they won the championship. Joe Cocker-Singer 5 years ago was an off the Richter scale talent. He could have put straight into the England team there. But you have to have this club pathway, and it's delayed him a long time. Thank God he has got back to where he was, but it's been a really torturous process.
But this is the great tension that's been with us since the mid-90s when the game turned on its head.
Yeah.
There's a tension, an inherent tension between those who believe that the clubs are there to produce a high-quality England side and those who believe that the clubs are an end in themselves.
Mm.
And that has never been solved because there are still those two camps. There is, I'm not sure. I'm still not sure. I wasn't sure in the mid-90s when all this started gathering pace, and I'm still not sure now that if you wandered around Franklin's Gardens or even the Stoop on a Saturday afternoon and said to Joe Bloke in the stand, would you rather England won the Six Nations with 3 Harlequins in the side, or would you rather Harlequins won the Premiership or the Champions Cup? I'm not sure he'd go with England.
Yeah, but it's
because I think the way that the rugby audience has changed in the professional era. It's much more tribal in terms of supporting clubs. We can push the numbers of people following the game to one side for a moment, but the people who do pay their money and spend 70 quid to sit in an open stand at Bath and get soaking bloody wet every second Saturday. I'm not sure that they put England above Bath in the pecking order.
No, but
I'm damn sure that Bruce Craig doesn't put England above Bath in the pecking order.
But in a sense, Chris, it shouldn't be a question of either or. It should be a question of one feeding the other and the other feeding back down. It isn't, I'm sure you're right, but that's probably because they can get into their club. Mind you, it costs them a fortune to get to watch a Premiership game these days as well. But certainly it doesn't cost them the fortune it would to get a ticket to, if they could possibly get a ticket to watch a game at Twickenham. So there are disconnects all the way through in some ways. But the idea that that the club game just is an entity in itself and a be all and end all, and that there is no international element to rugby. That is where, it doesn't differ from football, but the way in which it differs is that international rugby is still the cash cow for the professional game and for the game full stop. Therefore, the international game is extremely important in rugby union. And if the clubs think that they can supplant it, well, maybe, but at the moment, the numbers don't add up. So,
I don't think they do think they can supplant it. I'm simply saying that their priorities are far more club-driven within clubs than they were in Jeff's day. Wasps would have taken. Wasps were an ambitious club. They were a successful club, and they were a brilliant club for years and years and years. Always at the top end of things, always in the mix. Even when us Bathonians ruled the world, as Jeff will remember. But what was second in command for donkey's years, which is absolutely fine. But the days when
and then supplanted Bath by some distance.
Well, yes. Look, if you're just going to be parochial about it, in those days, to a certain degree, a club's status and stature was measured by its representative players, by the players it got into the top end of representative rugby.
And you know what? I still no.
There's still something about that. Of course, it worked, but I just think that the game has become, in terms of its attitudes and what have you, at club level, has become much more footballised than it once was.
You get a successful England side, and unfortunately, we have to go back some distance to find one that was really truly successful, and the boost that it gives the game is absolutely massive. And we've been waiting for Godot for, since then.
Well, look, what you're saying, Nick, it's obvious. You look at it, Twickenham sells out 82,000 tickets for an international.
Well, it did.
And as you're saying, Saracens, who have 6 or 7 international playing for them, can't even sell 10,000 tickets. So, the argument is that international rugby is the cash cow. It's what funds the game. It's what builds the game. It's what allows the game to, if you like, develop in some way or another. The fact is that the clubs themselves were the ones who said that players shouldn't be picked from outside the Premiership, that there should be no level of rugby. The RFU made one mistake when they did the negotiations. They used a club owner as their negotiator, Frank Cotton, who owned Sale at the time, and he agreed to everything that the clubs wanted instead of seeing what was best for rugby. He just agreed to no level of rugby between international and the Premiership. No players from outside the Premiership can be picked for England, and that includes players who go to France, etc., etc. The emergency thing that was thrown and tacked onto it was when clubs started going bankrupt. But previous to that, that was it. And so there were a number of elements that were mistakes by the RFU, yeah. But a lot of the problems that have been created in rugby have actually come from the Premiership.
When Saracens and Quins and Northampton were relegated, surely their players were still playing for England, weren't they?
Well, they didn't, did they? The only thing
I don't remember Mako Vunapola not playing for England because he was hanging around in the Championship.
You said Northampton, but when Saracens got regulated, their players. They're the only club that has had players playing from when they were in the Championship.
Okay.
And
that's always with the RFU. They'll make exceptions when it suits them.
Yeah.
They'll make exceptions for foreign-based players as well if it suits them. Of course they will.
But there is an argument that says that it wasn't the RFU that actually got Saracens relegated. It was the Premiership.
Well, you could say it was Saracens.
Who got Saracens relegated. It wasn't because they were jealous of what Saracens had achieved and how they'd achieved it. The argument that they were breaking the wage policy. You can't tell me now that there are no teams breaking the limits now.
I'm sure.
When you listen to what some of the clubs are doing, some of the players that the clubs are buying currently,
Jeff. You're right. It's a joke. In many ways, what happens is that they cut the knees off of the most successful club that there was. Their infringements were uncovered and absolutely clear, and they certainly deserve punishment, no question. But when you know that there have been infringements of the salary cap all the way along, that they've got, I don't know what their new regulatory framework is. Again, they haven't publicised it, but there used to be one bloke looking at it.
Nick, you know as well as I do, as a journalist, you know as well as I do, that what made the Saracens case different was it was plastered all over the Daily Mail. The documents were there for everyone to see. They had to take action. There was no choice but to take some action. The level of that action was within their own remit.
Take action.
But it was all over the papers.
It was the Premiership that took action.
Yeah.
It was their own. It was their own clubs.
Well, they
actually had a number of them that were still doing it.
They had to, Jeff. They would have looked completely ridiculous had they not. It was all over the bloody paper.
Well, Leicester were found guilty of doing exactly the same thing about a year later and got a slap on the wrist. It wasn't by the same degree, but if you got a law, you got a law.
Indeed, no, I completely agree with that. But the fact is, this was a journalistic-driven thing in it originally. They went to Company's House and they got it black and white. They had the actual pictures of the forms involved.
Oh, look, we all
very
know that.
difficult not to take action when it's staring you in the
if you remember.
Sorry?
I mean,
it happened 3 years before.
There's no doubt.
Well, yes. Yeah. And not just Saracens.
Even now,
You got away with it.
Even now, you look at it with Saracens, let's just say, all right, we know from journalistic reports that two of their stars, Owen Farrell and Maritoji, are both earning the best part of £1 million. How can they afford to be paying that? Can't tell me.
Marquee players. They're outside the salary cap.
But they've now only got one marquee player, haven't they?
Well, one of them must have taken a big pay cut.
They're only allowed to have one marquee player, and that's why Owen Farrell has said he's not going to play for England. he's prepared to write off the 125,000 he'll get from the RFU. Although
well, you may say that,
although
Jeff,
he's going to get that anyway, even though he can't get picked. I mean, he's done well, that boy. And they're offering him a contract when they know they can't pick him. Unbelievable.
Is Ollie still around?
You talking about me?
Yeah.
I was just listening.
He's
Well,
he's pushing the button, turning off the recording of various sections.
Yeah.
I'm waiting.
He spent the last hour saving us from 8 lawsuits.
I'm waiting to pull the trigger on the 2023 awards, but I mean, it's a fair point. It's about as silent as I've been in an episode. It reminds me of the first time Mark Evans came on. No, I'm waiting to pull the trigger on the 2023 awards from all of us.
Oh, let's go for it, yeah.
Which I think we should jump into before this conversation escalates even further. I think the general consensus is there are more questions than answers at the state of English rugby from 2023, which I know is the cliche of all cliches. But this hybrid deal does have some promise and does at least show that the RFU is recognising some sort of shortcomings. Let's do Player of the Year first.
Oh,
Jeff, you talked off air about how difficult it is to be Player of the Year for 2023, but I'm going to come to you first.
The only one you can say really is it's got to be Dupont, isn't it? I mean, he's outstanding for France. He's been outstanding for France, despite getting a broken cheekbone. He still played in the games in the World Cup, didn't he? You know, he's a quality player. He shows skills and he shows leadership as well on the field. He's not the captain, but he shows leadership of the team and. He had some great games. So I'd say he was my favourite player. And I hate to say that about scrum half. If I was saying props, I'd say Dan Cole. Because I think Dan Cole did really well coming through that World Cup. And if they kept him and Joe Marler on the field, England might have gone further.
Yeah, no doubt. Has anyone got any Dan Cole's one. Anyone got any objections to Dupont or some other names to throw in the mix?
Well, I would agree entirely that Dupont has been the best player of 2023. The moments you think back over the year are Dupont moments, starting with that incredible tackle on Mac Hansen. But my player of the year would be Sia Calosi. I just don't think we've quite got our heads around about a black South African captain in South Africa to back-to-back World Cups. And doing that after overcoming an ACL injury in 4 months instead of 8 months.
Yeah, freaking.
So I'm giving it to Calosi. But I mean, the best player of 2023 was Dupont again.
Yeah, I'm going to give it to RG Snyman, because when it came to overcoming adversity, just in a personal sense, you know, not only the fire pit thing where he was semi-incinerated, but then sustaining, I think, a second complete cruciate injury, and then to come back into the World Cup side, and to, in a way, you know, Etzebeth is a phenomenal lock, but Snyman in that game against England, I thought that the way that he responded when he came on was significant in pulling them through the mire that they were in. And the critical moment was obviously the try, and it was a 5 meter line out. The bloke goes up to take the ball, brings it down, feeds it out. I think it's Fourie who makes a burst to the line pretty well. And the guy who he's gone into the back line. He's the first receiver, and he sticks his hand up so that the clerk sees him. And he then takes the ball and takes it through about 3 England tacklers to dot it down. I thought, you know, if you ever had an instance of cometh the hour, cometh the man, that was it. I think he's a great lock. I think we've obviously not seen a huge amount of him over the last 2 or 3 seasons. The Munster haven't, because of his injury problems. but I think that he's a hell of an acquisition for Leinster, and a great lock, And a second mention just on the propping side, I'd sort of say Oxen Che.
I thought you might say that, yeah.
I'm certainly not. I certainly wouldn't give it to any blokes who've played 20 minutes a week. I mean, Snyman. I mean, he was very influential. To be honest, I agree with the Dupont thing. I think he's an extraordinary figure. He's the extraordinary player of this current age. But very close behind him, I would put Damien Penaud. I would go a long way to watch him play. I just think he's full of imagination and difference. He just does different things in different ways. I think he's the best right wing in the world, possibly by a bit of a distance. I love watching him play, so he'd be my vote. Just trying to avoid the obvious, really.
No, I was going to mention Penaud as well, because I think post World Cup, Penaud has been the standout of any of the players of the at the World Cup. So I think that's got to be
good against Bristol Seconds the other week, wasn't he?
Yeah. The 3-minute highlights of that match on YouTube are literally just him.
Amazing, yeah.
For the full 3 minutes, unbelievable. Snyman's a good shout. Do you remember when at one point in about 1 week, Snyman and Henry Arundel were both on their way to Bath? How did that shape up?
What one slightly quicker than the other, one imagines. But
taller than the other as well.
Yeah, Snyman might still be on his way. I guess he's just a bit slower to get there, whereas I think Arundel's definitely not coming.
No. Snyman's joined Leicester.
I know. Don't worry. I know. Okay, match of the year. Let's go to Brendan first.
I'm sticking with my post-World Cup answer on that, and that is Fiji-Portugal, which represented everything good about rugby, about the World Cup, about emerging nation coming through despite all the obstacles. It was the two crowd favourites of the entire tournament, and they produced. Sometimes you get a match like that and it just doesn't happen, does it? But that was a cracking match. And I noticed fair play, World Rugby have finally used their website to get the whole unedited highlights up on what's the website they own, or the Twitter handle they own. But I watched it the other day and it was as good as I remember it. A fantastic game of rugby.
Jeff?
I'm thinking hard. I actually think the Ireland-France game was one of the best games. I think that was, I like to watch Northern Hemisphere teams compete against each other. And really compete, and that was a game and a half, and the quality of the play, the way that both teams approached the game was one of the best games that I saw last year, certainly.
Chewy?
France, South Africa, quarterfinal.
Yeah,
I just thought as an expression almost of the possibilities of rugby in the modern age, that set new levels. I thought it set new levels of pace and dynamism. It was an extraordinary match, and particularly the first half was off the scale. And let's not forget that that quarterfinal weekend, in its different ways, but certainly the two big quarterfinals, pretty much saved that tournament. It lifted the tournament way, way, way above anything we'd seen in the pool stages, where there were far too many mismatches, far too many. And we all talk about the heroics of Chile and Portugal and Uruguay, and they were. It's a perfectly good description, but they still got absolutely spanked far too often. Yeah. So for me, the France-South Africa game was unbelievable. And it was as much about South Africa as France, actually, because France had that whole momentum behind them, the whole crowd behind them. And they played exceptionally well as a very, very good team, a really good team. And South Africa dug, they were down near the earth's core, they dug so deep to win that game. Brilliant.
Ironically, that was probably the one game in 2023 that Damien Penaud was actually quite quiet in.
Indeed, that's very true.
The match of the year.
That's very true. But it was a hell of a match. But partly because it also followed the Ireland-New Zealand game, which was pretty damn good in itself.
Yeah.
And you sort of thought there's there's the game of the weekend, and this lot turn out and play at a higher pace, and if anything, a higher intensity.
Yeah,
it was an amazing game.
I've got the same game written down, Ollie. I think that in terms of international rugby, it was the game at its best under the laws as they are at the moment, and a great game. What intrigues me about rugby union is that whatever is done with the laws, if players are, motivated to play and have the ability to play at that sort of pace and with that sort of intensity, it's as compelling a sport as you. It's more compelling than any other sport almost for me. And that game was at that pitch, and it was a Pyrrhic victory in many ways, because after France went out of the tournament on their shields, but went out of the tournament lost its joie de vivre, if you like, and that was a great pity. But South Africa's, the way in which they dig in, and they are undeniable in incredibly intense circumstances, made them ultimately, and you saw it in their other teams as well, made them ultimately the right team to win that World Cup.
Which does go to the Saya Khaleesi argument actually as well, because if there is a role for the captain on the pitch, Khaleesi doing whatever a captain does to hold the thing together, and to keep people calm and focused and cold-eyed about everything, then some effort. So
but also the intent. You talk about intensity. The intensity he brings. Look at it. When he sings the anthem, he doesn't just sing it. He bloody well pours himself into it every time. Every word of it is meant, and he then carries that onto the field with it. And it has that aura.
The beauty about South Africa is they play, if you like, old-fashioned rugby, don't they? They still want to dominate the set pieces to allow and to create the space for their backs to exploit. So they actually still use what we would call old-fashioned rugby, in the sense that everyone says about their bomb squad that they send on. It's not backs, it's forwards. They still want to dominate the set pieces, and that allows them to play the game that we're sitting back looking at and saying, wow, what a game.
And it's the big game attitude as well, Jeff, isn't it? I mean, it's perfectly possible that they'll go quiet for the next 3 years, that they'll lose games, possibly some of them quite badly. But come the next World Cup, they'll bend. But forcing them to break is going to be as difficult as it ever was.
Well, I'm hoping the next World Cup will be a Northern Hemisphere win. Touchwood.
Here
we've got to get more. We've got to get one sometime soon. I don't really care who it is, as long as it's Northern Hemisphere.
I'm just gonna. I had one more written down, which was moment of the year. Rather than go through everyone individually, because we've obviously been over a few moments with talking about the World Cup and stuff. If anyone wants to throw any moments that need a shout out, then please do. Brendan, you're almost certain to have one, and then we'll move.
Just a searing memory in a pretty mundane sort of England year. Those 3 drop goals by Hodgson were phenomenal. It was a phenomenal win, and it was so unexpected. The control and precision and the magnificence of that. And, of all the World Cup memories, that's right up there. That was an amazing moment.
Especially since he did it from Saracens. It's a long way kicking, isn't it? Did you mean George Ford there, Brendan?
I meant George Ford. I've done that. That's the second time I've done that.
Would you like another go at that?
I'll have another go at that.
Charlie Hodgson, come back.
Although I dare say Charlie Hodgson would have done exactly the same.
Yeah, I think he probably would.
Charlie Hodgson,
make that George Ford. You just cut it out.
Charlie Hodgson will be really confused when he comes on the podcast in a few weeks, and then he gets asked about his drop goals against Argentina.
One sort of slightly left field thing, but I do think in terms of this idea of growing the game and just make it, trying to create the conditions in which it's not the same old all the time. I thought Fiji winning at Twickenham in the way they did in that World Cup warm-up. I know it was a World Cup warm-up, but it was, I mean, they played extremely well that day, the Fijians. And I think it did go some way to announcing or confirming what we've always thought about them, if that they could only get their act together in terms of fitness and disciplines and ally that to their natural skills. They did that day in pretty poor conditions, in rather English conditions, actually. I know it rains in Fiji, but crikey, it was a big moment. And I think it was a big moment for them, and they celebrated it in the right kind of way. And yes, they lost against Portugal when perhaps they shouldn't have done it at the World Cup, but they still had a decent World Cup off the back of that and could have beaten England. Certainly could have beaten England in the quarterfinals for a second time. So I think that was a big step up for them, and I really hope that they can build on it.
I'd like to think that was true, but I think that it was only because of how poor England was that they were able to play in that way. And,
that's the only way Bath kept on winning those John Player Cups, because of how poor Wasps were.
Yeah, you know.
Moment for me, seminal moment for English rugby and for Australian rugby was Eddie Jones finally being shown the door at Twickenham and the door opening to him in Sydney, and in them taking an Australia team to their first full defeat in a World Cup. I thought that it was all wrong, apart from him being shown the door at Twickenham. The idea that the RFU would let him go straight to Australia with the inside knowledge that he had and an England team in the same half of the draw of Australia was unbelievably stupid. And the fact that he then crashed and burned with Australia was, was very good luck for Messrs. Sweeney and O'Shea. Bad luck for Australian fans who paid a fortune to go to France to watch the team. And, what has happened subsequently, I guess, with Eddie being back in Japan is probably best for everybody.
But Nick, look at it from this point of view, Nick. If the RFU had put Eddie on gardening leave, how many plants would have been upset?
The Australia might have been a better side.
What if they picked some plants?
If they stuck with Dave Rennie, almost certainly.
They could certainly have had a shrub at outside half who would have played better.
Being unfair. I think we're all being a bit unfair on Eddie, partly because he always said that his focus was the World Cups. It wasn't the Six Nations. It wasn't anything like that. And of course, where the RFU were focusing on Six Nations, that's what they believed was the most important thing. That's what brought, if you like, the differences between them. Eddie's thing was to try and look at the World Cup and try to win a World Cup. That's what his goal has always been, to a certain extent. And he missed out again.
It just shows, though, Jeff. It just shows how the RFU, again, I mean, their brief, they're employing him. Their brief is to tell him what they want. And
yes.
The idea that, Eddie thought that it was all right to just bloody well do nothing in between World Cups. It's just
yeah, I agree. Nick, I agree. But the person who should have sold him was the person who took the time to go over there to actually offer him vast sums of money to employ him, who happens to be the man who also doubled the contract for the Premiership.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
Yes, so the man who did that, who basically put the whole of the rugby union in England under huge financial pressure, also employed Eddie Jones for a huge sum of money. putting under more financial pressure.
And paid the Stormers a lot of money to get him as well.
Yeah.
It was a massive transaction.
But the idea
but
that
to be fair, no one was moaning about Eddie this time after this stage after the 2019 World Cup.
Actually, Woodward was livid with him, wasn't he, after the final?
And I'd say, Chris, in the press conference after the final in Yokohama, I asked Sweeney what the terms of Eddie Jones's contract were, for exactly the reason that I thought that they'd completely blown it.
Well, I certainly agree that he was given far too much latitude to go coaching other people and act as a consultant here and there and all that kind of stuff. You would think for that money, this is a full-time job. Seriously.
Seriously, I'd agree with you.
You know, I mean, when I was earning that kind of money on the Independent, I had to work long hours.
Sure.
Well, look, the Eddie Jones
debacle. The only amateur you lot.
Look, the Eddie Jones debacle gave us the chance for David Campeggio to come on the podcast twice and probably rant at us for about a total of 4 hours about just Eddie. So that sort of brings me on to the podcast episode of the year. I think he definitely deserves a mention. And if you haven't listened to that, definitely go and listen to, well, there are two. The one before the World Cup for starters, because a lot of his predictions do come frighteningly true. Brendan, what was your podcast of the year?
Yeah, Campo's on the podium, especially the first one when he necked 2 bottles of wine during the course of the podcast, and still made quite a bit of sense. In second place, I'd have Brendan Venter, who I think is always incredible value. Was so starkly honest about South Africa's World Cup win. Loved it, enjoyed it, but admitted it was lucky. They got a lot of decisions going their way, but they deserved the luck because they were in the brutal side of the draw. But the one I enjoyed most was James Waterhouse, our man in Kyiv in Ukraine with the bombs falling. Good stalwart old championship rugby player, Esher and Rotherham, a few others, I think Plymouth. And it was such a great chat, wasn't it? He clearly was taking time out for about an hour and a half from what is a very, very stressful job. And he was in this very stark hotel room, and you could sort of hear stuff going off in the background. And he just talked rugby for 90 minutes, and very intelligently and very well. And I just thoroughly enjoyed that sort of merging of rugby minds in rather strange circumstances.
It's only one of our more controversial episodes of the year. I think some people weren't.
Was it?
Yeah. Some people weren't too happy that we were mixing those two.
Oh, God forbid that we ever talk about anything.
Did you have a bad response from our Russian viewers?
I think it may have been slightly, yes, pro-Russia propaganda, but we'll ignore.
The robots are out that day.
No, you're right. It was. I'm glad you pulled that one out, actually, because it was fascinating, and I loved as well that obviously tough job he has, tougher than any of us have by some way. You could see how thrilled he was to be able to take the time out and just genuinely talk about rugby. So I think it's probably one of the most genuine episodes we've had of the year.
Proper journalism as well, amongst other things. Dare I mention
it? Yeah, for the proper journalism doesn't happen often on our podcast. I don't think. Usually it's just slander from Chewy. Speaking of, Chris, best podcast of the year.
Well, the best was Mark Evans' episode 1 because he agreed with everything I said. And the worst was Mark Evans' episode 2 when he disagreed with everything I said. I don't quite what had happened in the interim.
Got a job at Fiji.
In all seriousness, I wasn't present for the James Waterhouse thing. But I must say that contrary to popular belief, and I'm sure in the vast public that watch this, they think this is easy, but we rehearse this down to the last. You've got to be right on your toes here. This is the King Lear of rugby podcasts. You can get this badly wrong. The most challenging was certainly,
and you normally do,
and I should know. The most challenging sort of invigorating discussion that I was a part of was the one with Venter, who is always a real handful in the best possible way. He's got incredibly strong views. You never quite know what they're going to be before he chucks them out there, but he's I really enjoyed working with him when he was or interviewing him when he was a coach here, and he's lost none of his edge. Let's put it that way. So he does keep you on your toes. Good fun.
So we've got two. Well, Brendan Venter's doing pretty well. K&O, you got any others to add into the mix, or is it one of the?
Yeah, look, I mean, I thought that the two mentioned, the Brendan Venter and Campo, particularly the first one, were great. I really enjoyed the Willie Anderson podcast. Yeah. I thought that he came up with some intriguing insights on the Irish situation and where they were going. And in the end, I think his prediction that they wouldn't quite get there was proved right. But moments for me, I loved the other Brendans. Brendan Gallagher's set to with Mark Evans.
Was that this year? It feels like about 3 years ago.
Yeah, no, the first one was in 2022.
Listening to that one.
You are now known as Brendan Bollocks Gallagher, by the way. So
now known.
And I'd like to say that we've kicked off the new year with a great one with Jeff.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course, the most relaxing.
Oh, I know who. Yes.
The most relaxing podcast of the year was with Scott Hastings as he reclined on his bed.
He used to do that when he was playing.
Well, again, Jeff, you may say that. I couldn't possibly.
Well, you guys are right. We have started with a great episode with Jeff. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting year of rugby and hopefully a very great year of podcasts as well. So much to look forward to. So happy New Year again, guys. And see you all soon.
Good to speak to you. Good to see you.
Take care. After a dramatic Rugby World Cup, all eyes are now on the Guinness Six Nations. Make it a special day with friends, family, teammates, colleagues, or clients by booking an exceptional official hospitality experience with our friends at Keith Prowse, principal sales partner to England Rugby Hospitality. Their match day experience in the gate really has to be seen to be believed. So book your experience now and make memories that will last a lifetime. Visit keithprowse.co.uk/the rugby paper now. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.